The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., October 31st, 2019. I hereby appoint the Honorable Paul Tonko to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Dear God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We ask your special blessing upon the members of this people's house. They face difficult decisions in difficult times, with many forces and interests demanding their attention. Give them generosity to enter into their work. May they serve you in the work they do as you deserve. Give of themselves and not count the cost. Fight for what is best for our nation and not count the political wounds. Toil until their work is done and not seek to rest. And labor without seeking any reward other than knowing they are doing your will and serving the people of this great nation. Bless them, O God, and be with them and with us all this day and every day to come. May all that is done be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House has approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Joyce.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Hampshire seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend our remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on behalf of all Granite Staters to recognize the life and legacy of Elias Skip Ashew, who passed away unexpectedly last week. He embodied the spirit of the Queen City, and he left this world too soon. As a lifelong Manchester resident and St. Anselm College alum, Skip dedicated his career and life to bettering his community. He was a successful businessman, local leader, and philanthropist who never gave up on the potential of Manchester and all its residents. He was a community fixture who loved taking in the downtown area he helped revitalize. As chair of the Manchester Development Corporation, Skip was instrumental in making the Civic Center project a reality, one of the city's most consequential economic development projects since the Industrial Revolution. His immense impact was known by all, which is why he was named Citizen of the Year in 2000. I hope we can honor Skip Ashew's legacy by continuing to work together to move Manchester and New Hampshire forward. I offer condolences to his wife, Gail, the Ashew family, friends, and all who knew him. May Skip's memory be eternal. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, it is with heavy heart that I rise to honor the life and service of U.S. Army Sergeant Thomas Cole Walker of Conneaut, Ohio. Sergeant Walker, who enlisted after graduating from Conneaut High School in 2016, was tragically killed on October 20th during a training exercise at Fort Stewart. Just 22 years old, he had been awarded the Army Good Conduct Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Korea Defense Service Medal, and the Army Service Ribbon. His dedication to protecting this nation was nothing short of heroic and serves as an inspiration to us all. But Sergeant Walker was more than a patriot. He was also a son, a brother, and a husband. His loss is felt by many. Madam Speaker, please join me in extending condolences to the friends, fellow soldiers, and family of Sergeant Walker, especially his wife, Taylor, his brother, Jared, sisters Peyton, Whitney, and Wendy, and his father, Thomas. I pray that the outpouring of support from the Conneaut community will help ease their sorrow during this difficult time. I know this entire chamber joins me in thanking Sergeant Walker for his service, honoring his life, and praying for his family. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This month marked a painful anniversary of one fateful afternoon in Schoharie, New York, when 20 precious souls were lost in the preventable crash of a limousine that should never have been allowed on the road. The families of those lost, many from my hometown of Amsterdam, New York, the families of 8 young people devastated by the Kachog crash on Long Island in 2015, and countless others touched by these preventable tragedies have raised their voices to demand action. Last week, we introduced bipartisan legislation that answers their call. It is important, I believe, to respond to that call, to that request. The Safe Limos Act, the Take Unsafe Limos Off the Road Act, and the End the Limo Loophole Act have responded to them with great sensitivity. Thank you to my friend, Representative Antonio Delgado, for joining me in sponsoring this life-saving legislation, and to our colleagues on both sides of the aisle who have signed on in support. These common-sense measures will save lives and ensure that this never happens to another family. With that, I urge this body to raise our nation's limousine safety standards without delay, and I yield back, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to commend the House for passing H.R. 728, the bipartisan Title VIII Nursing Workforce Reauthorization Act. My wife, Mary, was a critical care nurse for over 45 years, and we can tell you firsthand the role that nurses play in patient care. But America is facing a shortage of skilled nurses. Our nursing workforce in America is aging, and the average age is 50 years old. By 2022, there will be 1 million nursing jobs open and available. We must find a way to encourage people to go into nursing. This bill helps not only to recruit nurses, but provide rural and underserved communities a competitive way to attract and keep talent. H.R. 728 is a step forward in addressing our nation's growing need for nurses. Madam Speaker, thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate a group of talented students from my district who recently earned the title of Mock Trial World Champions. The Venture Academy's mock trial team was one of 38 teams that traveled to New York to compete for this honor in the Empire Mock Trial World Champion. They successfully argued a fictional case involving a construction company that was accused of failing to take proper safety precautions by portraying the prosecutors and the defendants as well as the witnesses in this case. They ended up bringing back the top prize to Stockton, but this isn't the Venture Academy's first big success. Last year, the team placed 5th in the Empire contest, and for the past 6 years, they've won first place in the San Joaquin County mock trial competition. One day, some of these students could come here and stand in this podium, putting their debate skills to work while arguing for or against important legislation. So please join me in congratulating the Venture Academy's mock trial team, mock trial world champions, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House 1 minute, revise and extend remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, today we will vote on a resolution that will somehow try to legitimize the last 5 weeks' worth of phony impeachment inquiries going on downstairs in a secure room. Instead of voting on and taking up the issues that matter to the American people, we continue to chase this witch hunt, trying to take down the accomplishments of our President, Donald J. Trump. Indeed, the economy we have, the unemployment we have, the success we're having in the Middle East and other areas around the world aren't good enough. When my colleagues on the other side, I'll admit that they probably won't win another election. They have to use the impeachment process to try and take the president down. That shows how phony this process is. So to try today to pass a resolution to somehow legitimize the last 5+ weeks worth of work, and indeed really 2.5 years worth of attacking this president, shows that this place has a misplaced set of priorities. Instead of doing the work for the American people, using this as a political process to attack what we've all been able to accomplish. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and accept.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise on behalf of the people of my district, California Central Coast, who are worried about health care and the high cost of prescription drugs. Earlier this month at home, I spoke with people at retirement communities, town halls, and at their doorsteps, delivering food for Meals on Wheels. Throughout these conversations, one thing was made clear: we need to lower the cost of prescription drugs. I'm proud the House passed H.R. 987 to strengthen health protections and bring down drug costs. I'm excited that we're looking ahead to do more to ensure people never have to choose between life-saving medicine and putting food on the table. That's why I co-sponsored H.R. 3, the Lower Drug Costs Now Act. When we give the power to Medicare to negotiate prices directly with drug companies and make lower prices available to everyone, we all win. H.R. 3 gives power back to the patients. It is what people in my district are asking for, and I'm proud to support it. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to the resolution that attempts to justify the sham impeachment process that I've personally witnessed. The majority claims this resolution will ensure a, quote, fair, open, and transparent process. You want to know how fair this process is? The resolution names the Financial Services Committee as part of the investigation. And earlier this month, the chairwoman of that committee said President Trump should be, quote, placed in solitary confinement. Further, Republicans will only be allowed to subpoena witnesses with Chairman Schiff's approval, as deemed necessary to the investigation. If we've learned anything from the investigation so far, we know the majority does not think due process is necessary. They don't even think basic fairness is necessary. A yes vote on this resolution today gives a stamp of approval to a process that has been damaged beyond all repair in a blatant and obvious coup to unseat a sitting president of the United States. I will not support a resolution that promises an open and fair process without the basic, fundamental procedures necessary to ensure it. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and
without objection, gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong support of HRS 296, which is an important resolution affirming the United States record on the Armenian genocide that the House overwhelmingly passed on Tuesday. This historic resolution makes clear that our nation unequivocally recognizes the Armenian genocide and encourages education and understanding of these tragic events. Madam Speaker, as you know, the Armenian genocide, the first genocide in the 20th century, took place from 1915 to 1923. During this tragedy in history, 1.5 Armenians were killed, men, women, and children. Now, I was privileged to visit Armenia earlier this year and talk to many Armenians about this tragic history. We must remember and acknowledge the lives that were taken and the pain that was inflicted. We can never forget the atrocities that took place then or other examples of ethnic cleansing, nor allow them to continue. So I am pleased that this body passed this critical resolution on Tuesday for the constituents in my district, across the nation, and the world. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 660 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 52, House Resolution 660. Resolved that the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the Committees on Financial Services, Foreign Affairs, the Judiciary, Oversight and Reform, and Ways and Means are directed to continue their ongoing investigations as part of the existing House of Representatives inquiry into whether sufficient grounds exist for the House of Representatives to exercise its constitutional power to impeach Donald John Trump, President of the United States of America. Section 2. Open and transparent investigative proceedings by the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. For the purpose of continuing the investigation described in the first section of this resolution, the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, referred to in this resolution as the Permanent Select Committee, is authorized to conduct proceedings pursuant to this resolution as follows. 1. The chair of the Permanent Select Committee shall designate an open hearing or hearings pursuant to this section. 2. Notwithstanding Clause 2J2 of Rule 11 of the Rules of the House of Representatives, upon recognition by the chair for such purpose under this paragraph during any hearing designated pursuant to paragraph 1, the chair and the ranking minority member of the Permanent Select Committee shall be permitted to question witnesses for equal specified periods of longer than 5 minutes as determined by the chair. The time available for each period of questioning under this paragraph shall be equal for the chair and the ranking minority member. The chair may confer recognition for multiple periods of such questioning, but each such period of questioning shall not exceed 90 minutes in the aggregate. Only the chair and ranking minority member or the Permanent Select Committee employee, if yielded to by the chair or ranking minority member, may question witnesses during such periods of questioning. At the conclusion of questioning pursuant to this paragraph, the committee shall proceed with questioning under the 5-minute rule pursuant to Clause 2J2A of Rule 11. 3. To allow for full evaluation of minority witness request, the ranking minority member may submit to the chair in writing any request for witness testimony relevant to the investigation described in the first section of this resolution within 72 hours after notice is given for the first hearing designated pursuant to paragraph 1. Any such request shall be accompanied by a detailed written justification of the relevance of the testimony of each requested witness to the investigation described in the first section of this resolution. 4A. The ranking minority member of the Permanent Select Committee is authorized, with the concurrence of the chair, to require as deemed necessary to the investigation, I, by subpoena or otherwise, 1. The attendance and testimony of any person, including at a taking of deposition, and 2. The production of books, records, correspondence, memoranda, papers, and documents, and I. By interrogatory, the furnishing of information. B. In the case that the chair declines to concur in a proposed action of the ranking minority member pursuant to subparagraph A, the ranking minority member shall have the right to refer to the committee for decision the question whether such authority shall be so exercised, and the chair shall convene the committee promptly to render that decision, subject to the notice procedures for committee meetings under Clause 2G, 3A, and B of Rule 11. C. Subpoenas and interrogatories so authorized may be signed by the ranking minority member and may be served by any person designated by the ranking minority member. 5. The chair is authorized to make publicly available in electronic form the transcripts and depositions conducted by the Permanent Select Committee in furtherance of the investigation described in the first section. Any information and materials the Permanent Select Committee may deem appropriate with respect to the investigation described in the first section of this resolution. The chair shall transmit such reports and dependencies, along with any supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views filed pursuant to Clause 2.1 of Rule 11 to the Committee on the Judiciary, and make such report publicly available in electronic form with appropriate redactions to protect classified and other sensitive information. The report required by this paragraph shall be prepared in consultation with the chairs of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Committee on Oversight and Reform. Section 3, transmission of additional materials. The chair of the Permanent Select Committee or the chair of any other committee having custody of records or other materials relating to the inquiry referenced in the first section of this resolution is authorized, in consultation with the ranking minority member, to transfer such records or materials to the Committee on the Judiciary. Section 4, impeachment inquiry procedures in the Committee on the Judiciary. A, the House authorizes the Committee on the Judiciary to conduct proceedings relating to the impeachment inquiry referenced in the first section of this resolution pursuant to the procedures submitted for printing in the Congressional Record by the Chair of the Committee on Rules, including such procedures as to follow the participation of the President and his counsel. B, the Committee on the Judiciary is authorized to promulgate additional procedures as it deems necessary for the fair and efficient conduct of committee hearings held pursuant to this resolution, provided that the additional procedures are not inconsistent with the procedures referenced in subsection A, the Rules Committee and the Rules of the House. C1, the ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary is authorized, with the concurrence of the chair of the Committee on the Judiciary, to require, as deemed necessary to the investigation, A, by subpoena or otherwise, I, the attendance and testimony of any person, including at a taking of a deposition, and I, the production of books, records, correspondence, memoranda, papers, and documents, and B, by interrogatory, the furnishing of information. 2, in the case that the chair declines to concur in a proposed action of the ranking minority member pursuant to paragraph 1, the ranking minority member shall have the right to refer to the committee for decision the question whether such authority shall be so exercised, and the chair shall convene the committee promptly to render that decision, subject to the notice procedures for a committee meeting under Clause 2G, 3A, and B of Rule 11. 3, subpoenas and interrogatories so authorized may be signed by the ranking minority member and may be served by any person designated by the ranking minority member. D, the Committee on the Judiciary shall report to the House of Representatives such resolutions, articles of impeachment, or other recommendations as it deems proper.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 hour.
Madam Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. And let me say, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the professionalism that my friend from Oklahoma has demonstrated throughout this process. We don't see eye to eye on this impeachment inquiry, but he's always conducted himself with integrity and defended this institution. And during consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purposes of debate only. I ask unanimous consent that all members be given 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, on Wednesday afternoon, the Rules Committee marked up and favorably reported House Resolution 660, directing certain committees to continue their ongoing investigations as part of the existing House of Representatives inquiry into whether sufficient grounds exist for the House of Representatives to exercise its constitutional power to impeach Donald John Trump, President of the United States of America. Madam Speaker, this is a sad day for our country. Over 230 years ago, when the founders of our country wrote the Constitution, they entrusted us with the gift of self-government. But they knew the persistence of this gift was not assured. It may be taken for granted today, but having just shaken off a tyrant, the founders knew better. They understood that the very foundations of our country are dependent on safeguarding against one branch of government encroaching on the others. That's what the idea of checks and balances is all about. Within that system, the framers gave only this Congress the power, if need be, to impeach a president over possible wrongdoing. This fact that no one is above the law is what separates this country from so many others. Because of its seriousness, the impeachment process has been rarely used for presidents. For just the fourth time in our nation's history, Congress is now investigating whether to impeach a president of the United States. Our authority to do so under Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution of the United States and the rules of the House of Representatives is clear, and the courts have recently agreed. For all the disagreements I have with President Trump, for all his policies, his tweets, and his rhetoric that I deeply disagree with, I never wanted our country to reach this point. I do not take any pleasure in the need for this resolution. We are not here in some partisan exercise. We are here because the facts compel us to be here. There is serious evidence that President Trump may have violated the Constitution. This is about protecting our national security and safeguarding our elections. That's why the Intelligence Committee has been gathering evidence and hearing testimony. Like any investigation, reasonable confidentiality has been paramount. Witnesses should not be able to coordinate testimony in advance. The truth must be allowed to prevail. Republicans have been a part of every single proceeding conducted so far. Republicans conducting these depositions, along with their staffs, have had an opportunity to question each and every witness. Now, Madam Speaker, we are entering the public-facing phase of this process, and I commend the investigative committees and their staffs for the professional manner which they have conducted themselves. I'd also like to commend the courageous public servants that have bravely come forward to tell the truth. Without their courage, this possible wrongdoing would never have seen the light of day. The public should not be left in the dark. They should see the facts about the President's conduct firsthand. That's why I introduced this resolution. It establishes the next steps of this inquiry, including establishing the procedure for public-facing hearings conducted by the Intelligence Committee and the process for transferring evidence to the Judiciary Committee. It's about transparency, and it's about due process for the President. Some on the other side will never be satisfied with any process that uncovers the truth of what the President did. Madam Speaker, none of us knows whether or not President Trump will be impeached or convicted. Only the facts and how we respond to them will dictate the outcome. But I truly believe that 100 years from now, historians will look back at this moment and judge us by the decisions we make here today. This moment calls for more than politics. It calls for people concerned not about the reactions of partisans today, but of the consequences of an action decades from now. If we don't hold this president accountable, we could be ceding our ability to hold any president accountable. And at the end of the day, this resolution isn't about Donald Trump. It isn't about any of us. It's about our Constitution. It's about our country. And so I urge my colleagues to not just think about the political pressures of the moment. These will pass. Please consider the heavy responsibility you have today to this institution, the Constitution, and to our country. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma rise?
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I want to begin by thanking my friend for his kind words and for the professionalism which he handled last night's hearing. But before I begin, Madam Speaker, I would ask the chairman if he would withdraw his resolution, at which time I will ask unanimous consent that the House immediately proceed to the consideration of H.R. 668 instead, which provides for consideration of House Resolution 660 under a rule. Madam Speaker, this would in no way prevent consideration of the resolution before us today. However, it would provide us with an opportunity for all members to participate in the process. My proposed rule would provide for 4 hours of general debate on H.R. 660, allow for amendments under an open process, and provide for a motion to recommit. On an issue as important as this, Madam Speaker, 1 hour of debate on a resolution written in the dark of night and marked up in a process where no Republican amendments were accepted is simply insufficient. Additionally, it would allow all members to offer amendments to improve the process to get to the truth, which I'm sure is the goal of all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And with that, I would ask the chairman to accept my request.
Yield.
I'd certainly yield to my friend.
Gentleman's recognized.
No, I do not.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Then I would ask unanimous consent the debate time on the House Resolution 660 be expanded to 4 hours so every member could participate.
The gentleman from Massachusetts has yielded all time for debate only. The gentleman from Massachusetts would have to yield for this request.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In that case, I want to begin by echoing my friend's words. It's a sad day for all of us. For me personally, I'm sure for all of my colleagues on the Rules Committee, and for the institution as a whole. Today's resolution sets forth a process for impeaching the President of the United States. It's not a fair process, it's not an open process, it's not a transparent process, but instead it's limited and a closed process with a preordained outcome. Impeachment of the President is one of the most consequential acts that the House of Representatives can do, and it should only be done after the fullest consideration. And yet, over the last month, without a vote and with only the Speaker's say-so, committees have been engaged in a closed impeachment inquiry on what amounts to nothing more than a partisan fishing expedition. At least today, the majority is admitting what we have known all along, that the House was not following an appropriate process for impeachment. But I do not think the process we're setting forward in this resolution is a fair one either. It's not fair to the President of the United States. It's not fair to the House of Representatives, and it's not fair to the American people. The process laid out in the resolution before us is different from the process used for both President Nixon in 1974 and President Clinton in 1998. Today's resolution provides fewer process protections and fewer protections for minority rights than what we've seen in previous impeachment efforts. At our markup yesterday, Republicans tried to change that. We tried to offer constructive amendments that made the process more fair, that would give rights to the minority, that would give rights to the accused, and that would ensure due process for everyone. Republicans offered 17 amendments, and not one, Madam Speaker, was accepted. Not one. We offered amendments that would align the subpoena powers in this resolution with the subpoena powers used for President Clinton. Unlike the Clinton inquiry, today's resolution does not provide for co-equal subpoenas power. Instead, it grants the minority the right to subpoena witnesses and materials only with the concurrence of the chair, with no such limitation on the rights of the chair to issue subpoenas. We offered amendments that would change that, but the majority rejected both of them, or each of them in turn. We offered an amendment that would allow all members the right to fully access committee records. This is common sense. If you're doing something as serious as impeaching the president, then members should have the right to see what records the committee produced so that they will know what they're voting on. Yet the majority rejected that. We offered an amendment that would require the chairman of the Rules Committee to promulgate procedures to allow for the participation of the president and his counsel in proceedings of the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee. This right was granted to President Clinton in 1998, yet it's not present here. And the majority, again, rejected the amendment. I think the difference is clear. Today's resolution fails to give the minority the same rights as were present during the Clinton impeachment, and it fails to offer the same due process protections that were given to Presidents Nixon and Clinton. And in the latter case, I note those rights were given by a Republican House to a Democratic president. Today's resolution shows a Democratic House failing to give these same protections to a Republican president. Madam Speaker, the unfairness is clear. This is not a fair process, nor was it ever intended to be. It was preordained from the beginning. Without due process and without a fair process that respects minority rights, I do not believe the American people will regard this process as legitimate. A legitimate process is one that offers protections for everyone involved. And without those protections, this will be seen as just another partisan exercise, one the majority has been pushing since the very first days of the 116th Congress. We can do better than that, Madam Speaker. The Rules Committee should have done better than this. But since the Rules Committee didn't, the House must. And with that, Madam Speaker, I urge opposition to the measure and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, let me just say briefly that this resolution provides better protections for the President than what Presidents Nixon and Clinton received. And just like under Nixon and Clinton in the Judiciary Committee, the President's Counsel can submit additional testimony or evidence for the committee to consider. The President and his counsel can attend all hearings and raise objections. They can question any witness. This going beyond Nixon and Clinton, this resolution allows the President's counsel to ask questions at the presentation of evidence. Under our procedures, the ranking minority members of the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee may issue subpoenas if authorized by a committee vote. These are the same subpoena powers that the ranking minority member was given during Clinton and Nixon. Our resolution allows for greater member participation than under past impeachment procedures, including a robust process for the minority to propose witnesses and even issue subpoenas if authorized by committees. And let me just say, I think the fact of the matter is, I don't think there is any process that we can propose that Republicans who prefer to circle the wagons around this president and prevent us from getting to the truth would accept. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record H-Res S 81 from the 105th Congress, the Clinton Impeachment Inquiry Resolution that contains the same minority subpoena powers as the resolution.
Without objection.
And I also ask unanimous consent to insert in the record H-Res 803 from the 93rd Congress, the Nixon Impeachment Inquiry Resolution, which also contains the same minority subpoena powers as this resolution.
Without objection, so
Having said that, Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Mexico, the Assistant Speaker, Mr. Lujan.
Gentleman's minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of the resolution on the floor. We're here today because of the rule of law. This resolution, the inquiry, is Congress upholding the oath we pledged to the Constitution. We're here because of the President, his actions, his jeopardizing our national security for his own political gain. We're here because we know the White House and the President admitted that President Trump used the power of the presidency to pressure and strong-arm the president of a foreign country for his political gain. He called it a favor. Do us a favor, he said. But it wasn't a favor. It was a coordinated attempt to undermine the rule of law. Because of those actions, Congress is compelled to be here, to uphold the rule of law, to make sure Americans hear the truth, to say that no one, not even a president, can abuse the system without fair and just consequences. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, my good friend, Mr. Nunes from California.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I want to thank the gentleman. We are not here to run a show trial in an effort to impeach the President of the United States. It's clear that since the Democrats took control of the House of Representatives, they have always intended to transform the Intelligence Committee into the Impeachment Committee. Every one of their actions, from the staff they hire to the Trump conspiracy theories they investigate, their willful neglect of our basic oversight duties, demonstrates that this has been their plan from day one. And now this is further confirmed by the adoption of these rules, which simply gives the House approval for the Intelligence Committee Democrats to continue pursuing their bizarre obsession with overturning the results of the last presidential election. Nevertheless, after spending 3 years trying to manufacture a crime they can attribute to President Trump, they've come up empty. First, they insisted that the president is a Russian agent. Then they claimed he's a money launderer and a tax cheat and a fraudulent businessman. And now they've decided they don't like the way he talks to foreign leaders. But they have no evidence and no argument to support impeachment. All they have is the unconditional cooperation of the media and their advance their preposterous narrative. If they had a real case, they wouldn't be wasting time spoon-feeding ridiculous attacks that include defamation and slander on both current and former Republican staff of the Intelligence Committee. What we're seeing among Democrats on the Intelligence Committee down in the SCIF right now is like a cult. These are a group of people loyally following their leader as he bounces from one outlandish conspiracy theory to another. And the media are the cult followers, permanently stationed outside the committee spaces, pretending to take everything seriously because they too support the goal of removing the president from office.
Gentleman's time's
Regardless
expired.
of the
Gentleman's
means
time's expired.
I yield the gentleman 15 seconds to close.
Gentleman's recognized.
After today, the House Intelligence Committee ceases to exist. Oversight is not being done. And we now have a full-fledged impeachment committee in the basement of the Capitol. Think about that, America. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Maryland, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Raskin.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The House impeachment inquiry has discovered a substantial body of evidence that the President of the United States has violated the Constitution by placing his political interests above the interests of the country, thereby putting both our democracy and the nation's security in jeopardy. In light of this evidence, the House of Representatives must fully investigate. We have sworn a sacred oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We will honor our oath by countering all high crimes and misdemeanors committed against the American people and our Constitution. Today's resolution sets the table for the next phase of the inquiry. This phase includes open hearings led by the Intelligence Committee to allow the American people to hear from witnesses who have personal knowledge of the President's actions. Relevant materials will then be transferred to the Judiciary Committee so we may fulfill our solemn and time-honored duty to determine whether to recommend articles of impeachment. The majority has conducted hearings up to this point in a scrupulously bipartisan way, giving professional staff counsel for both the majority and the minority precisely equal time to question witnesses and equal opportunities for members of the majority and the minority to question them too. Despite...
Fire. Gentleman.
I yield the gentleman additional 20 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
We will afford the President all the due process protections that were afforded to his predecessors in a similar situation. That includes the ability to attend hearings, question witnesses, and submit evidence. As recently as Friday, the federal courts have reaffirmed that the House is the sole judge of impeachment, and we set the rules here. These rules are fair and strong, and will make sure that we can and we will defend the Constitution of the United States. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, the distinguished ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Mr. Jordan from Ohio.
The gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, trying to put a ribbon on a sham process doesn't make it any less of a sham. Never forget how this whole thing started. Democrats are trying to impeach the President of the United States 13 months before an election based on an anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge, who has a bias against the president, who worked with Vice President Biden. The day after the now famous phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky, the so-called whistleblower gets a readout from somebody on that call, writes a memo. In the memo, he uses terms like, this call was scary, frightening. But what does he do? Waits 18 days before he files a complaint. And who's the first person he goes to see, the first people he goes to see in that 18-day time frame? Chairman Schiff's staff. Chairman Schiff's staff, 435 members of Congress, only one individual, one member of this body knows who this person is who started this whole darn crazy process, Chairman Schiff. And what's this resolution do? Gives him even more power to run this secret proceeding in a bunker in the basement of the Capitol. This resolution continues the unfair and partisan process. Just 2 days ago, we were prevented from having the witness answer our questions in one of these depositions. And this resolution is going to give more power to the person who made that decision in the bunker in the basement of the Capitol. We are less than 13 months before the next election. Americans understand that this is unfair. Americans get fairness. They instinctively know this is an unfair and partisan process. They will see how unfair and partisan it is today when the vote happens on the floor of this House. We can do a lot better than this. We can do a lot better than this, and the American people see through it. I urge a no vote on this resolution, and I thank the gentleman on the Rules Committee for his work and his leadership. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a New York Times article titled, Army Officer Who Heard Trump's Ukraine Call Reported Concerns, in which Colonel Alexander Vindman, an Army officer who was on the call, said, and I quote, I did not think it was proper to demand that a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen, and quote, this would all undermine U.S. national security. I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from South Carolina, the Majority Whip, Mr. Clyburn.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I thank the gentleman for yielding me the time. Over the last month, the impeachment inquiry has built a powerful body of evidence around President Trump's call with President Zelensky of Ukraine when he told the foreign leader, "I'd like you to do us a favor, though." We've learned so much about that call and things that followed it because some dedicated public servants have demonstrated their patriotism to this great country by coming forward and testifying and giving us the information as they know it. These brave patriots have been called career, radical, unelected bureaucrats. They've been called that by a group of people who Thomas Paine would call summer soldiers and sunshine patriots. He warned us that these people will come forward in a crisis, shrink from the service of the country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman, for tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. Yet we have this conflict with us. The harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. We are here today because brave, dedicated public servants and patrons are standing up for their country.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I recognize my good friend and fellow member of the Rules Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding. Yesterday, Rules Committee reported an impeachment resolution that was hastily drafted without Republican input and just 24 hours notice for review. Last night, we offered on the Republican side 17 amendments. Unsurprisingly, none were adopted. Despite assurances that all members will have access to materials supporting the articles of impeachment, to date, Chairman Schiff has ignored 72 bipartisan requests to view Ambassador Volker's transcript. But pursuant to Rule 11, Clause 2E2, committee records are the property of the House, and thus members of the House should have access. Last night, the Rules Committee, it was stated that perhaps Republicans were not requesting the information at the right time. So you have to ask, when is the right time to ask to view our own House records? Republicans requested an authorizing vote, and now we will have one. However, this process has not been open and transparent, and it diverts from precedent set in the two most recent presidential impeachment investigations. As a result, this investigation will be conducted with no minority input. A presidential impeachment investigation is a national trauma. All members must take this constitutionally vested power seriously, and Americans deserve to be represented in this process. Unfortunately, neither serious nor equal consideration nor full access to records appear to be criteria under which the Democrats are willing to conduct this investigation. That is a shame, and it renders this process a sham. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Scanlon.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I take no joy in contemplating the impeachment of a president, because in contemplating it, we must acknowledge a threat to our Constitution and the values that bind us, not only as members of Congress, but as Americans. We've tried to work within traditional means to get to the bottom of serious allegations of misconduct so that we can deliver the truth to the American people. Committees have called witnesses and requested evidence only to be stonewalled. The president's defenders have tried to distract the American people by falsely claiming to have been excluded from the investigation, while their stunts and smears have hindered the constitutional process. This resolution outlines ground rules for the House as we move forward, granting the same or greater due process rights to the president and the minority as they themselves drafted when they were in the majority. We will have open hearings. They can question witnesses. They can propose subpoenas. They can present evidence. I am proud to sponsor this resolution. Our Constitution requires it, and our democracy depends on it. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, distinguished Republican ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee from the state of Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. No matter what is said by the other side today, this is a dark day and a cloud has fallen on this House. It has been falling for 10 months and it is showing itself today. What we are seeing is this. If the gentleman who is a friend of mine from the Rules Committee would actually want to talk about are these the same rules as Clinton and Nixon, then we would have had a much longer period of debate because he knows and I know it is not. There are similarities, some better, some not, but they are not the same. Let's get that out of the way first. The problem I'm having here is the resolution before us today is not about transparency, it's about control. It's not about fairness, it's about winning. It's about following the facts. This resolution is about delivering results. You know how I know this? Because the resolution gives no proper way for how these abilities or transferring of documents from the Intel Committee to Judiciary Committee will happen. Doesn't even give a time frame. And I've heard a lot of discussion today about maybe we didn't know how to properly ask last night in Rules Committee. I'll guarantee you my staff and I know how to properly use Rule 11-2E to ask for information. And we're told yesterday by a committee, one of the committees, that we couldn't have access to it because the parliamentarians said we couldn't. That's just false and needs to stop. This House is developing and shredding procedures every day. And if members of the minority or the majority cannot have the rights that they are given, then we're in a sad situation. And in fact, the haste to put this together, they didn't even exempt, as was done in Clinton and Nixon, the Rule 11-2E. They didn't even exempt it out. Even in those two impeachments, it was known that maybe we don't let every member come see this while this is going on. We didn't even exempt it during this time. We were so hurried to impeach this president, we don't really give a darn about the rules. But here's my biggest concern. As ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, I have a question. We've been here 200 plus years as a committee, and our committee has been neutered. Our committee who handles impeachment, we're the reason in that committee, that's our jurisdiction. We have been completely sidelined. Our chairman and others have been sidelined, so I have been sidelined. It is so bad that they had to have the Rules Committee write the presidential due process and give it to us. This is not right. I wish... I have another 30 seconds.
Yield the gentleman an additional 15 seconds to
Gentleman's recognized.
I do not know what happened to our committee, but we still exist. Due process only kicks in at judiciary for the president. It does not kick in the closed-door secret hearings of Adam Schiff. This is a travesty. No one should vote for this. This is a sad day. The curtain is coming down on this House because the majority has no idea about process and procedure. They're simply after a president. I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I get it. My friends on the other side of the aisle want to talk about process. But it's interesting that not one of them wants to talk about the president's conduct, and that speaks volumes. At this time, I would like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, another distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Hastings.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman, and I thank Ranking Member Cole for the manner in which you all are shepherding us through this difficult process. Madam Speaker, it's time for the American people to see how the administration put our national security on the auction block in exchange for political favors. At the heart of this scandal is the White House's decision to slam the brakes on nearly $400 million of military aid for Ukraine. Military aid for a vital partner. Military aid that was desperately needed to beat back Russian aggression. Military aid that was key to our own national security and essential in keeping an adversary at bay. We know what our Ukrainian friends thought about this. They were horrified. The facts are clear. Our top national security experts viewed it as a grave and dangerous mistake. And as we've seen time and time again from the Trump administration, this decision played right into Vladimir Putin's hands.
I yield the gentleman additional 20 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
I support pushing ahead with this inquiry because I swore an oath to defend the Constitution against America's enemies. The American people deserve the facts about how this abuse of power betrayed our national security and put our country at risk.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Before I proceed, I yield myself such time as I may consume to quickly respond to my friend, Mr. McGovern. We're debating process here because that's what this is. This is a process resolution to impeach the President of the United States. You didn't accept a single amendment last night. You didn't confer with us when you did it, so that's why we're talking process. It's an unfair process. With that, I yield to my good friend and fellow member of the Rules Committee, distinguished lady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko. 2 minutes,
How much
Madam
time?
Speaker.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank Representative Cole for yielding. This impeachment process is a total sham. This resolution, which seeks to legitimize it, misleads the American public. Section 2 of this bill is titled, "The Open and Transparent Investigative Proceedings by the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence." But the process set forth in this resolution is far from open and far from transparent. In fact, it is the exact opposite. The resolution continues the closed-door meetings that blocks entry to members of Congress and prohibits the president's due process rights. And it merely authorizes, but does not require chairmanship to make transcripts public. Last night, Republicans offered 17 amendments to add some fairness into the process, but Democrats rejected them all. I had an amendment to ensure minority witnesses could call an equal number of witnesses as the majority. Democrats said no. I had an amendment to require the Intel chairman to turn over exculpatory materials to the Judiciary Committee. Democrats shot it down. I had an amendment to give ranking members of the same authority as chairman to submit materials to the Judiciary Committee. Democrats rejected that too. The process set forth by this resolution violates basic standards of fairness. I urge opposition to this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself 10 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
The gentlelady wants to talk about a sham process. Let's talk about a sham process. Instead of respecting the constitutional authority of the House of Representatives, the White House has obstructed our investigation, ignored our duly authorized subpoenas, withheld key documents, prevented witnesses from testifying, and intimidated witnesses. They have tried to disparage members of Congress. I yield myself an additional 5 seconds. And who are trying to, they've disparaged members of Congress who are trying to fulfill their responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States. Article 1 of the Constitution gives the House the right to investigate the President, and we are taking our responsibility seriously. Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, the chairman of the Democratic Caucus, Mr. Jeffries.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
The House impeachment inquiry is about abuse of power. It's about betrayal. It's about corruption. It's about national security. It's about the undermining of our elections. It's about defending our democracy for the people. The House is a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for this president or any president. We work for the American people. We have a constitutional responsibility to serve as a check and balance on an out-of-control executive branch. Our job is to ask difficult questions on behalf of the American people. What we are doing right here is consistent with the words of James Madison, who in Federalist 51 said the House should be a rival to the executive branch. Why did Madison use the word rival? The founders didn't want a king. They didn't want a dictator. They didn't want a monarch. They wanted a democracy, and that is exactly what we are defending right now. No one is above the law.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, distinguished conference chair for the Republican Party, Ms. Cheney from Wyoming.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our Republican leader of the Rules Committee for yielding to me. Madam Speaker, we have heard a lot this morning already, a desire, a desperation almost on the part of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that the nation take this body seriously. Then they need to start acting like they take themselves seriously, Madam Speaker. When we are here gathered discussing this most grave and solemn obligation we have, addressing impeachment, we know, Madam Speaker, what a serious process would look like. We have seen it before. We have seen members on both sides of this aisle in the past, when we've been engaged in the impeachment of a president, act in a way that is serious, reflects the dignity of this body, and reflects the importance of the Constitution. That is the opposite, Madam Speaker, of what we have seen so far. No matter what my colleagues say about this legislation, no matter what my colleagues say about the process they've been engaged in to date, it is absolutely the case that it has been a secret process that has denied rights to the minority, that has involved leaking selectively things that the majority would like to have leaked, in which rights have absolutely been denied, and they cannot fix that. They cannot fix what has been a tainted record and a tainted process by now suddenly pretending they're opening it up. And Madam Speaker, let me say one other thing. Every time I hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about efforts to somehow undermine national security for political gain, I can't help but think about what they are doing precisely this morning. When we are facing the threats we are facing as a nation, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Speaker Pelosi and Chairman Schiff and others, take what is arguably the single most important national security committee in this body, the House Intelligence Committee, and they tell the House Intelligence Committee, turn away from those threats. Do not focus on oversight. Do not focus on the challenges we face. And instead, we are going to consume you in a political, partisan process to impeach the President of the United States. Madam Speaker, my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle will be held accountable by history for what they are doing.
Yield the gentlelady an additional 15 seconds to close, Madam Speaker.
They will be held accountable by history for what they are doing. They have absolutely no right to talk about threats to this nation if they are diverting the full attention, resources, and focus of the House Intelligence Committee onto a sham political process run by Chairman Schiff and Speaker Pelosi. I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Time's expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I am delighted to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Florida, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Shalala.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, having been through this before, I know how painful impeachment investigations can be. I also know that I'm not alone in saying that supporting this continuing inquiry is not a decision that any of us makes lightly. None of us has ever hoped to consider investigating our own president for compromising our national security and obstructing justice. Regardless of political ideology, we all understand our constitutional duty. It's with profound sadness and disappointment that we have to continue this investigation. The accusations the House is investigating go straight to the heart of our Constitution. Our Constitution endows us with not only the authority, but also the duty to hold our colleagues in the federal government accountable if they fail to act in the best interests of our nation. I don't think anyone here believes that domestic politics should interfere with foreign policy. I hope we will all vote to continue this investigation simply so that we can be clear on all the facts. More than anything, I'm confident that all of us possess a capacity for fairness and a commitment to doing what is right for the country we love. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to my good friend, distinguished Republican ranking member on the House Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Brady from Texas.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The impeachment and removal of the president is a serious matter. At its heart, it lets a small partisan group in Washington overturn the will of the entire American people. Above all, Americans believe in fairness, and when accused the right to due process, this sham impeachment offers neither. It's secret, it's partisan, it's being conducted behind closed doors to hide information from the American people, all with one goal in mind: take down President Trump by any means necessary. I will not legitimize this unprecedented and unfair charade with this vote today. Speaker Pelosi and Chairman Schiff long ago abandoned the due process and fairness that was guaranteed during the Clinton impeachment. I know because I was here in Congress for it. There is simply no cause for this impeachment inquiry, none, and it's shameful to create a constitutional crisis for purely partisan reasons. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, the distinguished chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence, Mr. Schiff.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of House Resolution 660. I rise in strong support, but I do not take any pleasure in the events that have made this process necessary. I rise in strong support of the resolution, but I do so with an understanding that the task before us is a solemn one. How each member of this chamber approaches the vote this morning and the days and weeks ahead may be the most important service as members of Congress we will ever pay to the country and Constitution that we all love and have pledged to defend. For the past several weeks, the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee, and the Foreign Affairs Committee have engaged in an intensive investigation. That work, which has been conducted with equal opportunities for both parties to question witnesses, has added a great deal to our understanding of the President's conduct, as evident in the July 25 call record and the events that both preceded and followed that call. That work has necessarily occurred behind closed doors because we have had the task of finding the facts ourselves without the benefit of the investigation that the Justice Department declined to undertake. Despite attempts to obstruct, we have interviewed numerous witnesses. We have provided important testimony about the efforts to secure political favors from Ukraine, who have provided important testimony about the efforts to secure political favors from Ukraine. We have reviewed text messages among key players which show how securing political investigations was placed at the forefront of our foreign policy towards Ukraine. This resolution sets the stage for the next phase of our investigation, one in which the American people will have the opportunity to hear from the witnesses firsthand. We will continue to conduct this inquiry with the seriousness of purpose that our task deserves, because it is our duty and because no one is above the law. Madam Speaker, I urge passage of the resolution, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to my good friend from the great state of Texas, Mr. Babin.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. What began with a rallying cry of "we're going to impeach the expletive deleted" to a crowd of liberal activists and young children by my colleague from Michigan on the very first day of this new Congress is now the majority's flagship initiative. What a shame and what a waste of time in the people's house. My view, our president was doing his job, ensuring that if taxpayer dollars from my constituents and yours was going to the other side of the world, that it would be paired with a commitment to crack down on corruption at all levels, no matter who someone's daddy is or what their political ambitions are. I think we all know that this was inevitable. From the moment Donald J. Trump was elected, the ends of harassment and impeachment have just been waiting for the means, and they think that they found them. They're wrong. There is, however, one small measure we can take as one house to bring a shred of dignity to these disgraceful proceedings. I can stand and be counted. We can stand and be counted one by one and announce our yea or nay with a vote by a call of the roll. To that end, Madam Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry. Gentleman's
time's expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, the Speaker, Ms. Pelosi.
Gentlelady's recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and Madam Speaker, thank you for the recognition. I want to begin my remarks by some of the most beautiful words in our country's history. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. It goes on immediately to establish Article 1, the legislative branch, Article 2, the executive branch, Article 3, the judiciary. The genius of the Constitution, a separation of powers, 3 co-equal branches of government to be a check and balance on each other. And it's to that we take the oath of office. We gather here on that opening day with our families gathered round to proudly raise our hand to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that is exactly what we are doing today. Sadly, this is not any cause for any glee or comfort. This is something that is very solemn, that is something prayerful, and that we had to gather so much information to take us to this next step. Again, this is a solemn occasion. Nobody, I doubt anybody in this place or anybody that you know comes to Congress to take the oath of office, comes to Congress to impeach the President of the United States, unless his actions are jeopardizing our honoring our oath of office. So I'm grateful to our committee chairs for all of the careful and thoughtful investigation they have been doing as this inquiry has proceeded. And today, the House takes the next step forward as we establish the procedures for open hearings conducted by the House Intelligence Committee so that the public can see the facts for themselves. This resolution ensures transparency, advancing public disclosure of deposition transcripts, and outlining the procedures for the transfer of evidence to the Judiciary Committee to use in its proceedings. It enables effective public hearings, setting out procedures for the questioning of witnesses and continuing the precedent of giving the minority the same rights in questioning witnesses as the majority, which has been true at every step of this inquiry, despite what you might hear fulminating there. It provides the President and his counsel opportunities to participate, including presenting his case, submitting requests for testimony, attending hearings, raising objections to testimony given, cross-examining witnesses, and more. And contrary to what you may have heard today, we give more opportunity to his case than was given to other presidents before. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for making that point so clearly. And these actions, this process, these open hearings, seeking the truth and making it available to the American people, will inform Congress on the very difficult decisions we will have to make in the future as to whether to impeach the president. That decision has not been made. That's what the inquiry will investigate, and then we can make the decision based on the truth. I don't know why the Republicans are afraid of the truth. Every member should support allowing the American people to hear the facts for themselves. That is really what this vote is about. It's about the truth. And what is at stake? What is at stake in all of this is nothing less than our democracy. I proudly stand next to the flag, and I thank the gentleman from New York for providing it for us. This flag, so many have fought and died for this flag, which stands for our democracy. When Benjamin Franklin came out of Independence Hall, you've heard this over and over, on September 17th, 1787, the day our Constitution was adopted, he came out of Independence Hall and people said to him, Dr. Franklin, what do we have, a monarchy or a republic? And he said, as you know, he said, a republic, if we can keep it. If we can keep it. And this Constitution is the blueprint for our republic and not a monarchy. But when we have a president who says, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want, that is in defiance of the separation of powers. That's not what our Constitution says. So what is at stake is our democracy. What are we fighting for? Defending our democracy for the people. You know that in the early days of our revolution, Thomas Paine said, the times have found us. The times found our founders to declare independence from a monarchy, to fight a war of independence, win, to write our founding documents, and thank God they made them amendable so that we can always be expanding freedom. And the genius, again, the genius of that Constitution was the separation of powers. Any usurping of that power is a violation of our oath of office. So proudly, we all raised our hand to protect and defend and support the Constitution of the United States. That's what this vote is about today. And we think the times found our founders, the times have found others in the course of our history to protect our democracy, to keep our country united. The times have found each and every one of us in this room and in our country to pay attention to how we protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, honoring the vision of our founders who declared independence from a monarch and established a country contrary to that principle, honoring the men and women in uniform who fight for our flag and for our freedom and for our democracy, and honoring the aspirations of our children so that no president, whoever he or she may be in the future, could decide that Article 2 says they can do whatever they want. Again, let us honor our oath of office. Let us defend our democracy. Let us have a good vote today and have clarity as to how we proceed, why we proceed, and again, doing so in a way that honors the Constitution. We must honor the Constitution in how we do this. We must respect the institution we serve. And we must heed the further words of our founders, e pluribus unum, from any one. They didn't know how many be or how different we would be, but they knew that we needed to always be unifying. So hopefully as we go forward with this, with a clarity of purpose, a clarity of procedure, a clarity of fact, a clarity of truth. It's about the truth, it's about the Constitution. We will do so in a way that brings people together, that is healing rather than dividing, and that is how we will honor our oath of office. I urge an aye vote and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, distinguished gentleman from Texas and the ranking Republican member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. McCall.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would also argue that Article 1 does not say you can do whatever you want to do. And the Constitution says that, and our founding fathers said that as well. And for 38 days, I have objected to this impeachment probe because it denies due process, fundamental transparency, and basic fairness to Republicans, the White House, and the American people. From day one, Democrats have ignored the rules and 45 years of historic impeachment precedent. Without any authorization, Adam Schiff has conducted a secret probe outside of his committee's jurisdiction. He has blocked us from calling our own witnesses. His witnesses are being interviewed behind closed doors in the most secretive room in the United States Capitol. That is not democracy. He has muzzled Republicans. I've been in the room, placing a gag order on depositions while leaking cherry-picked facts to the press. He refuses to even allow us to read the transcripts without being babysat by a Democrat staffer. He's refused to let us hear from the most important witness who brought this entire thing, the whistleblower. He has barred White House counsel from any participation. And now, 38 days into the Democrats' rush to impeachment, Speaker Pelosi claims she wants to establish rules and transparency. You cannot make your game fair by allowing the opposing team onto the field at the 2-minute warning. The bipartisan precedents from Nixon and Clinton still must be followed, and they are not being followed under this resolution. The White House counsel remains shut out of this process. This is unacceptable. Only 3 times in our nation's history has Congress exercised its grave power of impeachment. Our founding fathers in Federalist Papers number 65, Alexander Hamilton, warned us of abusing this power because they saw a future Congress abusing it.
Gentleman, an additional 15 seconds to close, Madam Speaker.
They foresaw a Congress at one point in history abusing this process for partisan political gain. So instead of overturning an entire election with a partisan weapon, we should just allow the American people to vote.
Gentleman's time's
with
expired.
that, I yield
Gentleman from
back.
Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I am proud to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Torres.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 660. Impeachment is not something that we take lightly. But when the President endangers our national security, he gives us no other choice. We now know from Trump's own call record that he pressured a foreign government to interfere in our elections and investigate his political opponent. We now know that Trump's potentially sought to apply leverage on Ukraine. First, with a coveted White House meeting. Second, by withholding security assistance to fend off Russian aggression. Today's resolution allows us to present these facts in a clear, professional, and fair way. I urge passage of H.R. 660 so the American people can too learn the truth. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to my good friend, distinguished gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. I've heard today how much my colleagues on the other side wish to make this an open, transparent process, and this is for we the people. And I would really like to believe that. And yet, after they introduce the resolution, they have another week's full of hearings behind closed doors, and they schedule another week's full of hearings behind closed doors. If this is about transparency, then open it up. If you want the American people to see it, open it up. Give members access to the transcripts. Let the media into the room. Let us participate. Failing to do so denies transparency, gives the lie to what you're saying.
Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. DeSaulnier.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong support of this resolution. From the very start of this inquiry, the White House has obstructed the House of Representatives. The White House has completely ignored duly authorized subpoenas and has tried to prevent witnesses from testifying. The White House has also directed other agencies to do the same. The Department of State, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, the Office of Management and Budget, all have refused to produce a single document in response to valid subpoenas. This is an unprecedented cover-up, and the White House and its defenders in Congress have tried to justify it with baseless procedural claims that contradict the Constitution and historical precedent. History will judge us all. After today, there are no more excuses for those who want to focus on process instead of substance. After today, there are no more excuses for those who want to ignore the facts and instead defending the Constitution. And there are no more excuses for those who turn a blind eye while the President pressures foreign actors to interfere with our democracy. I yield back the balance of my time.
Madam Speaker, I have a speaker on the way, so I'm going to reserve for the moment, if I
Gentleman
may.
reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, another distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Morelli.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in strong support of House Resolution 660. I am deeply troubled that this process has become necessary at all. But we have no choice. We must continue to investigate alarming allegations of misconduct by the President. And we continue with a public process through which all Americans will have the ability to access and to assess the evidence. This has been and will continue to be a fair and sober inquiry. Members on both sides will continue to have the opportunity to question witnesses, seek evidence, and refute testimony presented during these proceedings. Indeed, the President will have strong protections as we weigh the evidence during our deliberations. Our only goal is uncovering the truth. Did the President pressure Ukrainian leaders with the threat of withholding critical military assistance in order to serve his political interests? Has the President endangered American interests abroad by engaging in domestic political intrigue? These are serious issues, not of politics, but of national security. This inquiry is our solemn obligation, but it is our obligation nonetheless. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this resolution so we uphold our oath to the Constitution and preserve a transparent process on behalf of our
Gentleman from
republic
Oklahoma.
and the
Thank you
citizens.
very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished whip of the House Republican Conference, my good friend from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Cole, for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this resolution. Unfortunately, we've seen since the day that President Trump was inaugurated, there have been some people that made it public that they wanted to impeach him. Not because there are high crimes and misdemeanors, which is the constitutional standard, but just because they don't agree with the results of the 2016 election. That, Madam Speaker, is not why you impeach a president. There is precedent. This has only happened 3 times in the history of our country. Every time it not only started with a full vote of the House, but it also started with actual fairness. We're not getting that fairness today. When you look through this resolution, in multiple places, it gives veto authority by the chair to literally reject any witness that's brought forward by the minority. So no rights for the minority unless the chair so designates. In fact, in this resolution, it allows the chair to veto even the ability for the president to have legal counsel in the room. If the chair chooses at his whim, they can literally kick out the president's legal counsel. This is unprecedented. It's not only unprecedented, this is Soviet-style rules. Maybe in the Soviet Union, you do things like this, where only you make the rules, where you reject the ability for the person you're accusing to even be in the room, to question what's going on, for anybody else to call witnesses, when only one person has the right to call witnesses. And as we saw just the other day, the chairman was literally directing the witness to not answer certain questions by the Republicans. What kind of fairness is that? Maybe you think it's fairness if you can run roughshod over somebody because you've got the votes, but that's not how impeachment was supposed to go. In fact, Alexander Hamilton himself, during the debate on the Constitution in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton warned of days like this, and I quote, "The greatest danger is that the decision on impeachment will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." Alexander Hamilton warned about days like today. This is not what we should be doing. Clearly, when you ask the American people who know that they're paying higher drug prices, and they see that there's legislation, bipartisan legislation to lower drug prices, that won't come to this floor because of the infatuation with impeachment. We don't even have a bill to formally pay our troops and make sure they have the tools they need to defend this country because there's such an infatuation with impeachment. Madam Speaker, when you look through this resolution and you see how one-sided, how Soviet-style this is running, this is the United States of America. Don't run a sham process, a tainted process like this resolution ensures. It ought to be rejected, and I think you'll see bipartisan rejection of this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Judiciary, Mr. Nadler.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Yeah, but I mean, we got to.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I support this resolution because it is the solemn duty of the Congress to investigate the serious allegations against the President. I support this resolution because it is indefensible for any official to demand that an ally, one depending on our support in an existential struggle with Russia, investigate his or her political adversaries. I support this resolution because no person, Republican or Democrat, should be permitted to jeopardize America's security and reputation for self-serving political purposes. I support this resolution because if after a fair and thorough inquiry, the allegations against President Trump are found to be true, they would represent a profound offense against the Constitution and the people of this country. I support this resolution because I believe it is the duty of this House to vindicate the Constitution and to make it crystal clear to future presidents that such conduct, if proven, is an affront to the great public trust placed in him or her. I support this resolution not because I want the allegations to be true, they sadden me deeply, but because if they are true, the Constitution demands that we take action. I support this resolution because it lays the groundwork for open hearings. The House and the American public must see all of the evidence for themselves. I support this resolution because I know we must overcome this difficult moment for the nation. This resolution is necessary to ensure that our constitutional order remains intact for future generations. I support this resolution because we have no choice. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am going to reserve my time as we're waiting for a speaker or two to come.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I am proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, Mr. Engel.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I think you start with this, but not say it.
Yeah. I think you start with this.
I thank the gentleman and rise to support moving forward to the next open phase of this impeachment inquiry so that the American people can hear from witnesses, see the evidence, and understand the troubling story of what's taken place in this administration. As chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, my priorities are supporting American diplomats and diplomacy, working with partners and allies, and ensuring that our foreign policy advances America's interests. This administration has unfortunately undermined all those priorities since its first day. But in the last month, we've learned more and more about just how deep this goes. The facts are clear. The White House launched a shadow foreign policy that circumvented and undermined our normal diplomatic channels. A distinguished career ambassador was publicly smeared and pushed aside. Critical military aid for Ukraine, a valued partner locked in a life-or-death struggle against Russia, was blocked. That the goal, not some foreign policy priority, not an effort to make our country safer or stronger, quite the opposite, as delaying these resources hurt Ukraine and directly benefited Vladimir Putin. Why then? To pressure a foreign government to interfere in our 2020 elections. It's what the framers feared most. The president's own words say it best from the record of the call with President Zelensky as he sought the tools to push back against Russia. Mr. Trump's answer, I'd like you to do us a favor, though. Since that first damning piece of evidence came to light, the Intelligence, Oversight, and Foreign Affairs Committees have worked to fill in the pieces of the puzzle thanks to the courage of public servants who obeyed the law and testified, even in the face of bullying and intimidation from the administration, of ugly, baseless smears from the president's allies, and I condemn the shameful efforts to identify and harass the whistleblower whose life may be jeopardized for coming forward to tell the truth.
Gentleman's time's expired.
I salute all those patriots, and I salute my fellow committee chairs, Mr. Schiff, Ms. Maloney, and the late Mr. Cummings for their
I yield the gentleman additional.
Gentleman from Oklahoma. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, the distinguished chairwoman of the Committee on Financial Services, Ms. Waters.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Am I doing this? Or?
Thank you, Chairman McGovern. I rise in support of HRS 660 and the process that's set forth within by which the impeachment inquiry will continue to be conducted. To be clear, contrary to what these desperate Republicans have claimed, the Constitution imposes no requirement that a procedural resolution such as H.Res. 660 be voted on by the House. Claiming otherwise is but a fabrication meant to distract from the mountain of growing evidence that demonstrates this president abused his power for personal benefit. However, while not necessary, this resolution provides for impartial procedures similar to those used during the past impeachment proceedings. Because Republicans requested a formal procedural vote, I expect nothing less than their full support for H.Res. 660. Anything less would be shameful. As chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee, we've been conducting credible investigations into the conduct of this administration, and this work will continue in the manner outlined by H.Res. 660. I look forward to Democrats and Republicans alike prioritizing country over party as we swore an oath to do, voting in favor of H.Res. 660.
Gentleman from Massachusetts. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I would like you to do us a favor, though. President Trump said those 10 words on July 25 to Ukraine's president before asking the Ukrainian president to investigate a potential political opponent. For the past month, the Intelligence Committee has led an investigation into what happened around that phone call. In this early investigative stage, we have heard powerful corroborating evidence that President Trump led an extortion shakedown scheme over the Ukrainians, leveraging $391 million of taxpayer dollars to have a foreign power assist him in his upcoming campaign. Just as powerful as the evidence we heard is the courage of the people who have come forward to provide it, defying lawless White House orders to obstruct and instead adhering to lawful congressional subpoenas. The evidence, however, is not a conclusion. At this stage, we must move now to a public process with due process protections for the president to secure and test that evidence. When our founders designed the Constitution, they considered a lawless president and how to hold that person accountable. James Madison said the Constitution needed a provision for defending the community against lawlessness.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Now we must solemnly embark upon this journey. I yield back.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the president. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to inquire from my friend if he has additional speakers.
We do. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Colorado.
The gentleman will stay.
In that case, Madam Speaker, I'll reserve my time. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Happy to yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, today is a serious and solemn day for our country. The House's impeachment inquiry has exposed the truth and uncovered significant evidence that the president abused his power. To honor the oath to defend the Constitution that each of us took, we must move forward with this impeachment inquiry. For as Thomas Jefferson once said hundreds of years ago, a sacred respect for the constitutional law is the vital principle, the sustaining energy of a free government. Let us honor the Constitution and defend it today by voting yes on this resolution.
Time's expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Boyle.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I did not come here to launch an impeachment process. However, the facts demand it. A republic, if you can keep it. What we decide today will say more about us than it says about the conduct of the president. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my
Gentleman
time.
reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I yield, Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, on opening day, we take an oath of office. We take an oath not to a king, not to a president, but to protect and defend the Constitution. It is our solemn duty. And in fact, this resolution sets forth the procedures for the next phase of our impeachment inquiry. We know substantial evidence has been presented that the president abused his power, undermined our national security, and undermined the integrity of our elections. We are duty-bound to proceed. It is a sad day, but not because Congress has the courage to stand up for our democracy, but because the president's conduct has forced this action. I urge my colleagues to approve this resolution.
Time's expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my time.
Reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I'm prepared to close for our side, so I
Gentleman's
will yield
prepared
to
to
the
close.
gentleman.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, if I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will amend the resolution to ensure transparency for the American people. My amendment will do three very simple things. First, it will require the chairman of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence to publicly release the transcripts of all depositions and interviews in a timely manner to allow any necessary redactions to protect classified or sensitive information. My colleagues on the other side have been operating in secret and behind closed doors. They've been violating standing House rules by preventing member access to documents, let alone sharing anything with the people that elected them to serve. Second, my amendment requires the Intel chairman to transfer all records or materials, including exculpatory records or materials, to the Judiciary Committee. The chairman is instructed to again make the necessary redactions to protect any classified or sensitive information. In contrast, the Democratic majority's resolution lets the chairman choose what information he will share. And finally, my amendment requires the Intelligence Committee's records and reports, as well as any material received from any other committee involved, be made available at least 72 hours prior to the Judiciary Committee considering any articles of impeachment or other recommendations. The resolution before us today does absolutely nothing to guarantee that the American people will see this vital information. The procedures my Democratic colleagues set up for this impeachment inquiry are fundamentally unfair and fundamentally partisan. They reject due process, they reject minority rights, and they reject adequate public disclosure. The American people will not respect a process that's not fair, Madam Speaker. I urge the House to reject this measure, and I urge the House to insist on bipartisan procedures that respect the rights of the minority and the right of due process. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished Republican leader, Mr. McCarthy of California.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, elections have consequences. Our fellow Americans use their vote to choose who will work for them. So I ask you all a simple question, especially to my colleagues. Is that what is happening here today? Are we gathered in these final moments before we depart for a week to fund our government, to pay our troops? Are we gathered today to prove a new trade deal? Or are we gathered to debate the critical national security issues regarding China or Iran? Well, that answer would be unanimously no. We are not working for the American people. Those items would resemble the achievements of a productive Congress, a Congress that truly works for the people. But you know what this Congress counts? This Congress records is more subpoenas than laws. That's the legacy. It is not just devoid of solutions for the American people. It is now abusing its power to discredit democracy. By using secret interviews and selective leaks to portray the president's legitimate actions as an impeachable offense. Democrats are continuing their permanent campaign to undermine his legitimacy. For the last 3 years, they have predetermined the president's guilt. They have never accepted the voters' choice to make him president. So for 37 days and counting, they have run an unprecedented, undemocratic, and unfair investigation. This resolution today only makes it worse. I've heard members on the other side say they promise rights to the president, but only if he does what they want. That's the equivalent of saying in the First Amendment, you have the right to the freedom of speech, but you can only say the words I agree with. That's what you call due process. The amendment offered by my colleague, Mr. Cole, would help correct some of the transparency concerns we have witnessed over the last few weeks. But today is more than the fairness of an impeachment process. It is about the integrity of our electoral process. Democrats are trying to impeach the president because they are scared they cannot defeat him at the ballot box. That's not my words. That's the words of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle that has offered impeachment 3 different times. This impeachment is not only an attempt to undo the last election, it is an attempt to influence the next one as well. This is not what Democrats promised when they entered the majority 11 months ago. In this chamber, we heard from our Speaker while we all sat here. We heard what the Speaker said when she talked about words of optimism and cooperation. It was said we would work together to make America stronger, more secure, and more prosperous. We were told our mission was to return the power to the people. In fact, our new colleagues on the other side of the aisle were sent to Washington with a mandate to do just that. So what's happening? Nothing like that today. Not long ago, Democrats recognized that a partisan impeachment would put politics over people and harm our nation. That exact same Speaker that talked about cooperation, that talked about and promised the American people that they would be different. They would be different if you trusted you with the majority. You have failed in that promise. That Speaker said impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, the word of bipartisan, I do not think we should go down that path because it divides the country. What has changed since those words have been spoken? Alexander Hamilton wrote, "There will always be the greatest danger that the decision to use the impeachment power would be driven by partisan animosity instead of real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." This sham impeachment by Democrats have proven Hamilton right and portrays the Speaker's own words. I know emotions are high. I know members would even run for positions of chair simply on the fact that they would be a better chair for impeachment right after the election. But when we all stood that day and listened to the words of the Speaker of cooperation, we all raised our hand to uphold the Constitution. Tomorrow is November 1st. We're 1 year away from an election. Not just for this House, but for the highest office of presidency. Why do you not trust the people? Why do you not allow the people to have a voice? Why in a process that America lends their voice to all of us, that you deny us to speak for them? Is animosity risen that high? Is Hamilton proven correct again? There is a moment and time that you should rise to the occasion. This is that moment. This is the moment that history will write. History will ask you when you cast this vote, when you cast a vote to justify something that has gone on behind closed doors, I want you to ask the historian and answer the question, what do you know that happened there? Have you read anything that took place that you just justified? What do you believe the definition of due process is? What do you think the First Amendment is? Do you have the right to have a voice or only the words that you agree with? You may get elected in a primary, but in a general election, you're elected to represent the people of America, not to deny their voice. this House is so much better than what is transforming today. I believe everyone who runs for this office runs to solve a problem. But when you go back to the American public with the achievement of more subpoenas than laws, that is not why you ran. That is not why we are here. And that's why I agree with my colleague, Mr. Cole, that believes in the power of the people, people before politics, that we believe and know we can do better, that we believe the Speaker when she said about cooperation. We believed her when she said if you trusted them with the majority, they would be different. I guess it's only fitting you take this vote on Halloween. I yield back.
Members are directed to address their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Oklahoma has 1 minute remaining.
With that, Madam Speaker, I will yield back the balance
Gentleman
of my time.
yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, let me assure the distinguished minority leader that this Democratic majority can legislate and also fulfill our constitutional responsibilities to hold this president to account, because it is our job. We took an oath to do that. And in terms of our legislative accomplishments, they're second to none. When you were in the majority, you shut the government down. Today, the Education and Labor Committee just reported out the higher ed bill. We passed a bill to deal with gun violence. We passed the DREAM Act. We raised the minimum wage. We're working on a bill to lower prescription drugs. We passed a bill to protect our elections so Russia doesn't interfere in our elections ever again. So, Madam Speaker, I want to say to my colleagues that I am proud of the process we are following here today that brought us this resolution. You know, Madam Speaker, past Congresses under the impeachments of President Nixon and Clinton found it prudent to have a resolution in place laying out the path forward. And that is what we are doing here today. This resolution before us today is based on precedent. It includes protections for President Trump. The President's counsel is given the right to ask questions when the evidence is presented. The rules here expressly provide his counsel the chance to be invited to offer a concluding presentation. Neither of these things were guaranteed to President Nixon and President Clinton. And it lays out a clear path forward so that the American people know what to expect going forward. Madam Speaker, the obstruction from this White House is unprecedented. It is stunning. We don't know whether President Trump will be impeached, but the allegations are as serious as it gets, endangering national security for political gain. Madam Speaker, history is testing us, and I worry, based on what we have heard from the other side today, that some may be failing that test. There are no kings and queens in America. That is what separates this country from so many other nations. No one is above the law. Let me repeat that. No one is above the law. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. I yield back my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
The question now occurs on ordering the previous question on the resolution. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam
Gentleman from
Speaker,
Oklahoma.
on that I would request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the resolution. The chair emphasizes that this will be a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 231, the nays are 196. The previous question is ordered.
Okay, what do we do? The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker.
Resolution is adopted.
Madam Speaker,
the gentleman
on that I would request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number have arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote, colleagues, a 5-minute vote. Why are we doing
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Chuck Todd.
Well, good morning, everyone. We are coming on the air with some breaking news. The move to potentially impeach President Trump over his dealings with Ukraine is taking a major step forward right at this hour. As the House of Representatives completes its vote, essentially a test vote on the issue of impeachment itself. The House is considering a resolution that will serve as a roadmap for the process going forward, including televised public hearings that obviously could dramatically reshape the country's interpretation of what the president did and could ultimately lead to an official trial in the United States Senate. For the very latest on this vote, let's go to my colleague Jeff Bennett on Capitol Hill. Jeff, it looks like in the vote it is almost going as expected, very party line. Right now, two defectors on the Democratic side, one sort of former Republican who we expected to defect to the Democratic side, and that's it.
You're right about that, Chuck. Those two Democrats who represent Trump-friendly districts. And so, yes, the point you make is a good one. This vote is the roadmap that takes this private impeachment inquiry process public. For the last 3 to 4 weeks, you've had House investigators deposing witness after witness behind closed doors. That process is now coming to an end, and House Democrats, House Democratic leadership, they've made the point that as this private process goes public, you need to establish a roadmap for doing that. And so this resolution, the text of which was released earlier this week, what it says is that the investigative heavy lifting, that will stay within the realm of the House Intelligence Committee. Adam Schiff leads that committee. So when we do get these public hearings, you'll see Adam Schiff in charge of it. At a certain point, when those hearings come to an end, that committee will write a report that then heads to the Judiciary Committee. That Judiciary Committee will be the one, that'll be the committee that writes up the articles of impeachment. You will then see, at some point potentially, another vote on the House floor on those specific articles. That would then set up the Senate to have a trial. So House Democrats are really laying out a calendar here that has no dates on it, right? There is no timeline for how long this will take. Publicly, we've heard House Speaker Nancy Pelosi say that the timeline depends on the truth line, meaning however long this investigation takes is however long it takes. That's the public comment. Privately, Democrats have been saying since August that they want to wrap this up by the end of the year for a number of reasons. One, the feeling is that if this moves into an election year, it will give Republicans an opening to say this is really about the election, not about the Constitution. The other part of this, as you well know, you got a number of Democratic senators who are running for president, and if there is a Senate trial in January or February, you would then have all of those Democratic candidates here in Washington, not in Iowa, not in New Hampshire, doing the work that they would rather be doing as part of their campaign, Chuck.
Jeff Bennett on Capitol Hill for us, and as folks can see on the vote board there, just about everybody has voted, and this is very reflective almost of the country itself. Democrats on one side of this story, Republicans on the other. Let me go to Hallie Jackson, who's standing by for us at the White House, our chief White House correspondent. And Hallie, the White House has got to be breathing a sigh of relief here in that the House Republicans are all on their side, but they're all on their side in process. This is not a vote on the substance of what the president did, so there's still time for concern down the road. But politically, for now, the president's got his party in his corner.
And you know what, Chuck? Sources that I've talked to this morning here at the White House are very keyed in on this. And you know what they are liking right now? That blank spot where it says Republican yay. No Republican defectors. We are told that the White House, the president, has been working nonstop.
There is one.
So Justin Amash, considered an independent.
Independent. So they did lose one. They can't pretend they didn't.
So I will say, though, Justin Amash made very clear months ago that he was no longer going to be sort of towing the party line on the Republican side on this. And I would think
on
that
this vote, the yeas are 232. The nays are 196. The resolution is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Hallie Jackson, Nancy Pelosi cutting you off there. My apologies there. Quickly, 10 seconds, and we'll wrap this up.
Seek recognition.
President doesn't want impeachment, Chuck, but he has it now. This is official. The most he can hope for now is to keep Republicans in line behind him, even as this moves to substance, Chuck.
I think at this point he may hope that maybe the articles don't ever get written. We shall see. So a dramatic new chapter officially now begins here in Washington, an historic constitutional showdown between the two co-equal branches of government, the legislative and the executive, in a process laid out by our founding fathers more than 2 centuries ago. We'll, of course, continue to follow this story, and my colleague Lester Holt will have complete details tonight on the NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, reporting tonight from Los Angeles with the latest on those deadly California wildfires. For now, for my colleagues on Capitol Hill at the White House, I'm Chuck Todd, NBC News in Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 656 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 823. Will the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of Bill H.R. 823, which the clerk will report by title.
a bill to provide for the designation of certain wilderness areas, recreation management areas, and conservation areas in the state of Colorado and for other purposes.
Rose, Wednesday, October 30th, a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of House Report 116-264, offered by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crow, had been postponed. What now? Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume in Part B of House Report 116-264, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment Number 1 by Mr. Curtis of Utah. Amendment Number 5 by Mr. Tipton of Colorado. Amendment Number 6 by Mr. Crow of Colorado. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 116-264 by the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Curtis, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in Part B of House Report Number 116-264, offered by Mr. Curtis of Utah.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Can I use that in my next class? Yeah, whenever you rush, training print recorders tomorrow is See ya.
No question. There's a bad place to find your kids. After they call themselves they don't see like a he's been nicer. The thing is, capitalism has done more than anything ever in history of the world. Of course they don't. Yeah.
So you're thinking that's just, they said that's not an organized effort, no. It's just them trickling out. Exactly. Yeah. Because it's the end of the week. Yeah. Okay, we did this.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get it out of the
Any choices in Omar? Yes, it is.
See ya.
That's a great day. Have a good guys. Bye-bye. Yeah, I got Hammy.
Well, and that's what World War II showed us. Yeah. When other powers are fighting for dominance, if you don't have a big dog in the race, you're going to have a bunch of little 10 dictators who are trying to dictate in their environment. And they try, and they did. And then the United States well, let's be honest. Why does it set up a two-player shoot when
it's happened in the Boston. They just drive by it and smoke it.
So, well, I agree. Why don't we I agree. You know, Russians they made their own version, but it only from the resolution. Only go
I mean, like, we won't pay more than $30 per this day. Have this drink. We won't pay more than $30
Yes.
Yeah, I'm always he says, you're going to never take it up again. So cheap, we got to go all the way up. I'm back to take a train. Yeah. I didn't know it didn't was she was not allowed for she needs to move those to the I respect
things he does say. So,
yeah, okay. I mean, I can't because I'm at the press with what's next? Yeah, so that's where I am right now. Is he in around? Yeah, if you want to ask her, check it out, that would be the
Ja, vi får den alldeles nyss. Kommer du se den alldeles strax? Ja, ja.
Yeah.
So they were still at 5
I gotta eat something.
They show up like with them. Of course, everybody notices they're like holding
Yeah, that's it. There's thanks. In the briefing, we're making
It's not like there's not a $30,000 catch.
well, you gotta walk.
You guys need to get a golf cart with you to bring in full.
One of these. We're almost there. In the summer, we're gonna set up an umbrella with fans, so when they come out,
They should be.
Olga, ¿cómo estás? Perfecto, en 20, ¿no? ¿O como 15? 14, perfecto, igual. Con gente que vaya. Sí, ya tengo hoy.
I've never had like good
Ja, ja, absolut. Ja, ja.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, how are you?
All right. Fun day, right?
You're not being involved in one of these events tonight. You're like, hey. How are you? What's going on, world?
Yeah, but they've got one more.
Oh, sure. I know, but I never would have thought in my wildest dreams that I would ever cover it too. And some of our time's been around long enough that they're
We're gonna be busy.
Except the last impeachment, I was at the White House. This one looks like
You want to talk nice for a second?
What's that?
Okay, sound good.
Got it.
Thank you.
But like about
You know, those arrivals and departures at the White House, those are the most stressful things we have to cover now. Because there's so many people.
Yeah, I know.
There's the full pencil. Line 1, 2, 3, 4.
Finally is line 1 tomorrow. I asked people.
Yeah, you have, so the sound people go out first. Oh, okay. And then cool TV. And then in town, travel pool. And then I think correspondence. And then, so this was
Was there any
everybody
pictures
else.
for you in the
I don't know.
pool?
No. But it's crazy.
Ja, och skulle bara säga det att det verkar kvar den här frågan om att Demokraterna vill att stängda dörren i tvärtom hela den här diskussionen handlar om
Yeah, so could I just departure on Saturday, please?
All 7. Okay.
Ja, man kan fråga varför. Eller strunt i den frågan.
I can definitely.
Yeah, they No, I was had him. And the dog jumped on the couch. They were just playing around. Is it going to be a while? Yeah, there's 7 votes. Yeah, they are. There's a whole lot of votes. Do they have a ready? I see it.
Men den blev klar och det blev ett tydligt ja till den här resolutionen efter att riksrättsprocessen är igång och också sätter upp ett tydligt regelverk för saker. Republikanerna har ju kritiserat den här processen och klart inte funnits ett regelverk, men nu får det plats i Ja, men det är ju snarare så att Demokraterna säger att den här processen är någonting som Republikanerna kritiserat och talat om att det rör sig om hemlighetsmakeriet och så många förhör har varit i strukturerna. Men nu så annonserar man att de här förhören kommer att hålla så att alla följer med. I'm good, how are you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I never had a
But I mean, like the past 3 weeks. Det här är första formellt steg, men det kommer att vara senaten som avgör presidentens öde. Där amerikanerna som har just nu så ser det ut som det partiet men allt ut ur
Is it still going in and out?
Así es, ¿qué tal? Muy buenas tardes. Pues terminaron esta votación sobre esta resolución hace solo minutos. Fueron 232 votos a favor y 196 votos en contra, lo cual demuestra lo dividido que están ambos partidos, pues fueron solo 2 demócratas que votaron con los republicanos. Un independiente, Justin Amash, votó con los demócratas y claramente cada uno de estos legisladores estaba votando de acuerdo a su partido y sus posiciones actualmente. Por otro lado, recordemos que esta resolución era simple y sencillamente una ruta para las investigaciones y cómo iban a continuar avanzando en este proceso de una posible destitución en contra del mandatario estadounidense Donald Trump. ¿Qué dice la resolución? Primero, reafirma las investigaciones que están ocurriendo. Segundo, asegura que habrá transparencia en este proceso. Tercero, activa audiencias públicas, que recordemos que desde que inició este proceso a finales de septiembre, hace unas 5 semanas, pues las audiencias se han estado llevando a cabo a puerta cerrada. Cuarto, permite que el presidente estadounidense Donald Trump y sus abogados personales participen en este proceso. Y por último, también dirige al Comité Judicial de ser necesario que comience a redactar los artículos para acusar al mandatario estadounidense Donald Trump. En las últimas horas y antes de que se llevara a cabo esta votación, Nancy Pelosi aseguró que este proceso simple y sencillamente debe hacerse para proteger la Constitución de Estados Unidos y que no tiene nada que ver con los partidos. Veamos.
So how were the other pastors? How were the other pastors?
Y si bien esto simplemente demostraba cuáles serían las próximas legislaciones o las próximas normas a seguir en este proceso de destitución en contra del mandatario estadounidense Donald Trump, lo que queda claro es cómo se van a llevar a cabo las votaciones de ahora en adelante en este proceso y demuestra nuevamente la división que hay entre ambos partidos y que los demócratas opinan pues que este proceso debe continuar haciéndose para proteger la Constitución, mientras que los republicanos con su voto hablaron y han dicho básicamente que esto es una farsa nuevamente, que es uno de los puntos que más ha criticado la líder de la Cámara de Representantes, Nancy Pelosi. Por otro lado, los legisladores salen hoy a un receso y se espera que las audiencias públicas puedan comenzar tan pronto como el 11 de noviembre. La próxima semana en Washington estará relativamente callada, a diferencia del día de hoy. Esta es toda la información que tenemos en directo desde Washington. Emiliana Molina, Carlos, regreso con ustedes. A ustedes, chau, chau.
Done or ready to go? Either one. We are so done. But you can feel it.
So, I think all the calls.
You should call our bill again now.
Yeah.
Well, just call this. Why? Oh, he's there.
Hey, it's Scott.
He's there too? He's there too? Is he there? No, but I could say, hey, I was surprised to hear that something on Blackwood didn't look yet. I wasn't told anything about it. Yeah, that.
Yeah, he's not. Yeah, but I mean. Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy, it's Scott. Hey, buddy, it's Scott. Mark, hey, Mark, it's Scott. Can you hear me? Hey, I saw Mr. Call from you guys. He's going to be He's like 14 minutes, yeah. Yeah.
I know, but you have to.
All right, well, if you hear anything, give me a shout.
If they change the law, appreciate it. Great. I'm not advertised. No, that's not.
Yeah, call him. Okay.
But that's good. I was actually going to ask well, what'll happen in your like, if we do live, we literally just I got you. Appreciate it. Thanks, sir. History or news today?
So, brother, how are you? Oh, yeah, sure. Busy? Not to keep you running around today, huh?
I'm off to get someone.
Nice. Good. Yeah, no complaints. I figured out last week.
Yeah, it's funny to see all the people the last one.
Oh, yeah? Right, okay.
So no one I talked to knows anything about you know, for us?
Well, I'm just saying.
Oh, that's as far as I know. We got no.
I originally scheduled for the interview.
Yeah, they waited until after all. I got no PO or IP information
Thank you.
Yep. I can always, you know, tell like the sound of your key.
He got kind of down, helicopter. Right next to the Oh, yeah. I Yep, exactly. Alcohol, I think we got
Voy a tener, pero estoy esperando que salgan del pleno, entonces están un poquito retrasados, lo debería tener por ahí los próximos 20 minutos, pero no nos confiamos pues. O sea, pero sí voy a tener, sí, un congresista, Luis Correa, representante. Exacto. Wow. Listo, perfecto, bueno. ¿Por dónde quieren el titular? Ahora representantes aprueba resolución.
Yeah, I mean,
Además, yo te envié un libro y te envié el full de...
what are you using?
Listo. El nombre del representante que va a entrevistar. Te aviso si no me alcanza.
Oh, you're using.
Dale, gracias.
So are they here next week?
No, that's
You know, why?
yeah. Well, it's pretty dead.
So that's a CPS.
Yeah.
They're supposed to come out with this new sign.
Yeah.
Den här frågan om ni som har blivit kvar, så den är ju bra. Det var ju väldigt och jag
Hopefully. They did get
Ja,
Breaking news, Phillies release British change the batteries right now. Deal.
Ja, ta den sista.
Yeah, so it's related to that.
Ja. Jag kan nämna det. Gå in i det. Ja, det blir bra.
Yeah, I remember I'm just, that's where, I was there, I did that. It's rough to be sick. That was that week. Somebody else so we went to the island
Sure, I pulled out the mic. My name is
That way you know. You know what I mean? That way you know nobody is. So I'm coming, I'll turn it over to you. That's okay.
I've seen some.
But not on this.
Is he playing himself?
They did. And now they keep asking me for more. They keep asking, can you send us this here, can you send us this there? I'm like, why do you demand so much? Yeah, Tim is.
This Master Tape does all of he does all of his moves and like
See that?
Come on, Dave. Let's do a little.
Yeah. You gotta call it.
Yeah.
He's not bad.
Come on, Dave. Here, come in. I want to see where you are.
Look how smooth he is. Oh! Did he invent this? Did he?
You know you're hot?
Yeah.
You didn't care that we
It's from governance.
Not that bad.
I'm good for him. Wow, show.
Show force.
Show white force. That's probably a white force too.
Yeah. See, you almost trapped.
You know how I learned to dance?
All right, you ready? We just had a vote on the floor. In March of this year, Speaker Pelosi said this about impeachment. Impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country. Today, the country just witnessed the only bipartisan vote on that floor was against. The question to the Speaker are the same questions I provided in a letter about the unfair process that we had. What has changed since March? In all the hearings, there's nothing compelling, nothing overwhelming. So the Speaker should follow her own words on what bipartisan vote on that floor and in the sham that has been putting this country through this nightmare. That's exactly what this vote shows today. I want to call up our whip, Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Kevin. And when we talk about the vote, I think it's important to note when you see that not only did every single Republican reject this Soviet-style impeachment process, but we were even joined by Democrats who couldn't stand it anymore. If you look at where we are right now, we're at an important point in history. Clearly, there are people that we serve with that don't like the results of the 2016 election. And that's their prerogative. But the country next year will be deciding who our president is going to be. It should not be Nancy Pelosi and a small group of people that she selects that get determined who's going to be our president. If you look at the resolution today, they talk about fairness. Now, if they really think that they can tell people it's fair, that only the chairman gets to decide who the witnesses are, and they give us an opportunity to call witnesses, but if the chair says they don't like the witnesses don't come forward. They allow the president to have legal counsel in the room unless the chair decides that they don't want the president's legal counsel in the room. That's never happened before. With the Clinton impeachment, with the Nixon impeachment, Republican and Democrat alike, both sides were treated equally. Both sides could call witnesses. The president's legal counsel was in the room, not at the discretion of the chair, but because it's fair. And so when you look at this Soviet-style process, it shows you that they don't really want to get to the truth. They want to remove a sitting president. In fact, the author of the articles of impeachment said, if they don't impeach the president, he will get reelected. Now, that's not why we have impeachment. Alexander Hamilton made it very clear. His concern when they were trying to promote the Constitution was that he didn't want to see impeachment used for political purposes. Yet that's what happened today. He predicted it, and it happened today. It's a sham. It shouldn't have happened. It's a tainted process that Adam Schiff's been conducting, that Nadler might one day conduct. The House deserves better. The people of this country deserve better. We should be tackling real problems. We could have lower prescription drug prices today, but Pelosi won't bring those bills to the floor because she's infatuated with impeachment. Our troops could be properly funded, but Pelosi's infatuated with impeachment. In fact, we could have better trade relations with Canada and Mexico and create 160,000 new jobs today, but Pelosi's infatuated with impeachment. We deserve better. Our conference chair, Liz Cheney.
Thank you very much, Steve. I want to make sure everybody is focused on a couple of things, and you'll hear from a number of our members here today about this. The first one is that the Democrats cannot fix this process. They've now created a record over the course of the last several weeks with witnesses they selected. We know there were circumstances where Chairman Schiff told witnesses not to answer questions that our members were asking. We know there have been circumstances where our members have attempted to go read transcripts and they've been told by staff
counsel that were not expressly provided during prior impeachments, and they lay out a clear path forward so that the American people can hear firsthand the serious and alarming allegations about President Trump's abuse of power. I'm proud of the resolution we put together. I believe that it will withstand the test of time. I'm proud of the work of the Rules Committee, and even though it get somewhat contentious last night, I want to say I'm proud of the way all members, Democrats and Republicans, conducted themselves. There was no live streaming and narration during the markup. Nobody stormed the committee. Nobody seized a microphone. People behave, I think, in a way that is respectful of this institution, and I appreciate the cooperation of Ranking Member Tom Cole and the other Republicans as well. I want to thank all the committee chairs here for their hard work to uncover the truth on behalf of the American people. This vote is a victory not for any of us, but on behalf of the constituents who sent us here and who demand that we follow the facts and uphold our oath. I also want to thank the courageous civil servants who have come forward to testify so far, many in contradiction of this administration's attempts to silence them and at great risk to their own career. Let me conclude with this. I truly believe that 100 years from now, historians will look back at this moment and judge us by the decisions we are making here today. At the end of the day, this resolution isn't about Donald Trump. It isn't about any of us. It's about our Constitution, and it's about our country. And now I'm happy to yield to the distinguished chair of the Select Committee on Intelligence, Adam Schiff.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. This is a solemn day in the history of our country when the president's misconduct has compelled us to continue to move forward with an impeachment inquiry. The resolution today sets out the procedures going forward with that impeachment process. The Founding Fathers understood that a leader might take hold of the Oval Office who would sacrifice the national security, who would fail to defend the Constitution, who would place his personal or political interests above the interests of the country. They understood that might happen. And they provided a mechanism to deal with it, and that mechanism is called impeachment. We take no joy in having to move down this road and proceed with the impeachment inquiry, but neither do we shrink from it. The resolution from the perspective of the Intelligence Committee sets out important procedures for how we may conduct our open hearings. During the depositions that we've conducted thus far, we've used a format that we believe very conducive to the fact-finding process. Those procedures now will be incorporated into the open hearings in which staff counsel will be permitted for lengthy periods of time to do sustained questioning for up to 45 minutes per side, followed by member questioning. We've used this, I think, to great success for both parties during the course of the depositions, where in the depositions we have alternated 1 hour for the majority, 1 hour for the minority, 45 minutes for the majority, 45 minutes for the minority. In those depositions, over 100 members have been eligible to participate. I should tell you that notwithstanding those that have complained about lack of access to the depositions, most of the members who have been permitted to attend have failed to attend, have not made use of the availability of attending each and every deposition. But those that have, on both sides of the aisle, have had an equal opportunity to question the witnesses. And indeed, when we move into open session, both parties will have an equal opportunity to question any witnesses that are called. The resolution will also permit me, as the chair, to begin releasing the transcripts of the depositions. And I think that you will see when those are released just what equal opportunity members of both parties have had. We recognize the seriousness of this undertaking. We recognize that we have been compelled by the circumstances to move forward. When a president abuses his or her office, when a president sacrifices the national interest, when a president refuses to defend the Constitution, and does so for the purpose of advancing a personal or political agenda, the founders provided the remedy. I make no prejudgment as to whether that remedy will be warranted when we finish these hearings. I will wait until all the facts are put forward. We will undertake this duty with the seriousness it deserves and to the best of our ability. Thank you. And I now yield to the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you very much. No person Republican or Democrat, president or anyone else, should be permitted to jeopardize America's security and reputation for self-serving political purposes. No president, no official can demand that an ally of the United States do anything in particular to help his or her political ambitions as a condition of receiving help from our country. If, after a fair and thorough inquiry, the allegations against President Trump are found to be true, they would represent a profound offense against the Constitution and against the people of this country. It is the duty of the House to vindicate the Constitution and to make it crystal clear to future presidents that this kind of conduct, if proven, is an affront to the great public that place their trust in him or her. This resolution that we passed today lays the groundwork for open hearings in both the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee. The House and the American public must see all the evidence for themselves. The resolution makes clear the ample safeguards in the process that will be given and that will be adhered to. The resolution is necessary to ensure that our constitutional order remains intact for future generations. What we have seen are allegations of conduct on many levels that, if proven to be true, are a challenge to the democratic order, to the democratic norms on which we all depend. We must hand this country to our children with its democracy in as good a shape as when it was handed to us. We simply have no choice because no one can be above the law, and we must enforce that. I'll now yield to the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Engel.
Thank you. I'm Elliot Engel, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. For the last month, we've been working lockstep with the Intelligence and Oversight Committees on this impeachment inquiry. So far, we've seen damning evidence that the president abused his power and jeopardized our national security to help his own political fortunes. He pressed for another round of foreign interference in an American election. It's what the framers feared the most. Today, we've laid the groundwork for the next open phase of this investigation. Moving ahead, the Foreign Affairs Committee will continue to support this effort because we know that the administration's abuse of power resulted in our foreign policy being subverted and our diplomats being smeared, sidelined, and harassed. We cannot stand for that. I'm glad that the resolution we passed today will provide for an open, fair process that will allow the American people to hear from witnesses, see the evidence, and understand the troubling story of what the president and his allies did. They deserve to know the facts, and they soon will. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to call on Carolyn Maloney, the acting chair of the Oversight Committee.
Thank you. I will be brief. I have just 2 points. First, I want to commend my colleagues for their diligent work. This is a very grave matter. As they have shown, we are acting deliberatively, thoroughly, and without delay. Secondly, I want to remind everyone of the words of our beloved former chairman, Elijah Cummings. And, quote, he said, "We are fighting for the soul of democracy," end quote. That is our core mission under the Constitution. We cannot allow a president or any president to extort foreign countries into interfering with our democracy. We cannot allow a president to withhold critical military aid that we have in Congress provided in order to counter Russian aggression. And we cannot allow a president to ignore duly authorized subpoenas, withheld documents, prevent witnesses from testifying, covering up wrongdoing, and obstructing Congress. This is a fundamental corruption of the Constitution, an abuse of power, and a breach of the oath of office. Thank you, and I yield now to the chairman of our caucus, Hakeem Jeffries.
Thank you, Congresswoman Maloney. I thank the distinguished chairs for their diligent work throughout this process. This is not a celebratory moment here in the capital city. This is a solemn moment. It's a sober moment. It's a serious moment. None of us came to Congress to impeach this president or any president. But duty now requires that we investigate the serious wrongdoing that is hiding in plain sight. This is a moment for every single member of the House of Representatives to put principle over party, to put the Constitution above corruption, to put democracy above dereliction of duty. This is not a moment, this impeachment inquiry is not about Democrats versus Republicans. It's not about the left versus the right. It's not about progressives versus conservatives. The impeachment inquiry is about right versus wrong. And we have a constitutional responsibility to follow the facts, apply the law, be guided by the Constitution, and present the evidence of wrongdoing to the American people. The impeachment inquiry is about abuse of power. It's about betrayal. It's about corruption. It's about national security. It's about the integrity of our elections. It's about defending our democracy for the people. With that, I think we have an opportunity to take just a handful of questions. First row.
And any chairman who would like to speak. In light of all the information that you've gotten from testimony from witnesses behind closed doors, are you willing to expand the inquiry beyond the narrow scope of the Ukraine scandal, and are you also able to share any of the witnesses that you would like to testify publicly?
Well, the process that has been set forth by Speaker Pelosi from the very beginning is that we are operating under an impeachment inquiry umbrella, where there are 6 committees of relevant jurisdiction that will explore the wrongdoing that exists coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and at the end of the process make recommendations to the chair and the Judiciary Committee with a continued focus on the Trump-Ukraine scandal, the abuse of power, the solicitation of foreign interference in the 2020 election. And that inquiry, of course, will continue to be led by Chairman Adam Schiff and the Intel Committee because it relates to a matter of national security.
But to expand on your question, we're not going to speculate on that now, but we'll see what happens.
Can you identify any witnesses to come before the public?
We're not going to speculate on that now.
If you could go to the mic, sir, of course. Now that the resolution has passed, when can the American people expect to see open hearings? Might it be as early as the week after next?
That you should really ask Chairman Schiff, and it depends on the speed with which things go there. And I can't answer that question.
How crucial is John Bolton's testimony to building the public case that you hope to build against President Trump?
Again, you should ask Chairman Schiff that, but obviously any testimony is very important testimony, especially from someone so located, so crucially located.
Front row.
Chairman, you say that you have the right to impose appropriate remedies if you determine that the president is unlawfully blocking witnesses. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's elementary that we're one party to a litigation unlawfully blocks the investigation, as this president has been doing, although we hope he won't continue doing it. You may have to take some steps. We may have to draw adverse inferences. We may have to do other things. We'll see.
What kind of punishments are you considering?
I'm not considering anything at the moment. We'll see what happens.
Third row.
Chairman, how do you interpret the way Republicans voted this morning and the fact that 2 Democrats voted with them on the resolution?
I interpret that the Republicans are ignoring evidence, that they don't want to see a proper investigation. Period. That's all I can draw.
Last question. Last question.
It's okay, go ahead.
All right, two questions then. First of all, Chairman Nadler, how long do you believe House Judiciary will need once you receive reports? And obviously, I think it's important for the American public to understand the timeline here, if at all possible. And then for all of you who supported this bill.
I'm sorry?
For everyone on here, this bill has more ability for the president once this reaches the Judiciary Committee than the Intelligence Committee. That's something that Republicans have a problem with. Why have those different abilities for the president in Judiciary than Intelligence?
Well, your first question was the timeline.
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't know. It depends. It depends on obviously how many witnesses, etc. I can't speculate on that. The second question is: remember, the Intelligence Committee is doing a basic investigative job, a job that in past impeachments was done by the Starr Commission or by the Ervin Committee, etc. Once it goes to Judiciary, it's a different stage, and it's a different stage. It's not the initial fact-finding stage, and it's proper that the president have more recourse at that point. Now remember, the minority, the Republicans, have the same rights and have rights to call witnesses, to examine witnesses, etc. in Intel. They will have the same rights in Judiciary. But once it gets to Judiciary, if we're carrying on an impeachment, if there's been a recommendation for an impeachment and we're carrying on that investigation, that inquiry at that point, then the president ought to have more rights than in the initial fact-finding stage.
President yesterday directed his Republican defenders to focus on substance. That's what House Democrats have been doing from the very beginning, and we invite our Republican colleagues, pursuant to the direction of the president, to do the same. What is this all about? Congress, on a bipartisan basis, allocated $391 million to Ukraine in military and economic assistance because we deemed it in our national security interest. Ukraine right now is under attack from Russian-backed separatists. Ukraine is a friend, Russia is a foe. Ukraine is a democracy, Russia is a dictatorship. The United States may very well be the only thing standing between Vladimir Putin and Ukraine being completely overrun by Russia as part of his fantasy to reconstruct what he views as the glory days of the Soviet Union. In that context, Congress allocated the $391 million in a bipartisan fashion. In February, the administration wrote to Congress and said the aid is on the way, but it never showed up. And then in May, the Trump Department of Defense wrote to Congress again and said the aid is on the way. And in that letter said all necessary preconditions have been met by the new Ukrainian government, including the implementation of anti-corruption protocols. That was in the letter that was sent by Trump's Department of Defense in May. And yet the aid never showed up. Twice during the summer, Mitch McConnell called up the Trump administration and said, "Where's the aid?" Mitch McConnell couldn't get a good answer. And then on July 18th, at the White House, the Office of Management and Budget holds a meeting. Mulvaney is there, apparently, where they say the reason the aid has not been released is at the explicit direction of the President of the United States of America. On July 25th, 1 week later, we understand why. His own words, "Do us a favor, though," pressuring a foreign government to target an American citizen for political gain and thereby solicit foreign interference in the 2020 election while withholding this aid from a vulnerable Ukraine. Mr. President, that's the substance of the matter. That's what we're going to focus on moving forward. Thank you.
And let me add to that and say that foreign aid is a very important component of what we do around the world in order to keep America really at the top of the world. And the money that the Congress allocated for foreign aid was not the president's personal piñata that he can use however he wants. By withholding that money, he's taking an asset of the United States, not a personal asset of the United States, and withholding it to try to coerce the leader of another country to help him in his political election. I mean, if that isn't crazy, then I don't know what is. So this really just cannot stand. Foreign aid is not the president's personal piñata to do what he wants with it. The Congress appropriates it, and Ukraine is in a very important crossroads right now. And so this is a very, very serious matter. It's not simply a matter of the president talking to a leader of a foreign country. It's a matter of taking American money that the Congress allocated for foreign aid for a country, to withhold it and say to that leader, I'm not going to give it to you unless you do what I need you to do. That is an absolute disgrace, and that's one of the reasons we're here.
Thank you very much.
Somebody's phone. Whose phone?
Phone? Oh, okay, we'll leave it. Don't want to take it.
Somebody's phone.